you can go to someone and say, hey, I'm premium and I'm charging this price, and they say, send me a portfolio, and then you have nothing to showcase. There are no shortcuts in these things. You have to do the work. There's the work of managing a business, of understanding your market and research, and how can you get yourself through the doors, right? There really are no shortcuts.
Welcome to another episode of the Lucrative Africa podcast. I'm Dami and I'm going to be your host again today. And with me here, I have Philippe, who is my guest. Philippe is a storyteller, a communication strategist, a creative leader, and a photographer with over 15 years of experience in these spaces. He's also a co founder and now, more recently, an advisory board member at Illume, a communications and storytelling agency in Kigali, Rwanda. But yeah, I'm not going to do too much of the introductions. I'm going to hand over the mic to Philippe to continue telling us about his work and himself and what he does. So Philippe, I'm handing over the mic to you.
All right, Demi, thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. And I hope this is going to be a fun chat and that we're going to learn a lot. So, yeah, as you mentioned, a communication, a creative strategist, and also a photographer who's been around the continent for about now into my 15th year with extensive experience, be it on the continent, but also across the world. And yeah, it's an interesting journey. It's one where, if I can say, starts around this sort of idea of rediscovering where I'm from. And as a person who was Rwandan but born a refugee in Burundi, and then eventually after the genocide against the Tutsi ended, and relocating to Rwanda. Yes, so this kind of journey of trying to figure out what is my country, what is my history, what is my culture, kind of led me to this path, and that's why we're here, I think, to discuss. So yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Way better than I would have put it. But yes.
Yeah, yeah,
So would you mind, just telling us or talking to us about your story, what you do, what inspires you to do the kind of work you do, and where did it all start? How did you get into photography, into communications? Can you tell
yeah,
us about that?
super. Yeah, no, thanks. I think like many um, I say Africans in general, or maybe even beyond the continent, is that you often find um, growing up that your families, your loved ones, all will always have big aspirations for you. And I think my parents were no different. My family was no different to that. So very early on, I had these kind of, maybe, I don't know if I would call flashes or seasons of creative moments. I remember in high school, I used to sketch quite a bit and I was pretty decent at it. And then later on, I picked up the guitar and I was, within like 6 months, I was able to play songs. And these things are happening while I'm on a journey to become, um, I guess, a diplomat, or rather with aspirations of becoming a diplomat, where by the time I get to uni, I'm studying political science with sort of international relations as an angle. And along that journey, I also happened to come across photography, something that kind of fell into my lap, and one thing leading to another. And from that moment, this spark was reunited with this sort of creative side. But essentially, um, I guess in a way, in retrospect now, was still kind of the line of political science or international relations, where you're kind of trying to understand the world that we live in. So um, with that, uh, I eventually, and this is in Canada while this is happening, and um, I would come home to Rwanda every 2 years or so for holidays, and without this curiosity of rediscovering my country kept growing, and this want and really to figure out where are you from, what's your history, what's your culture, what's sort of the creative side, just kept coming back. And it's a question that I just could not get rid of out of my mind. It was this thing that was really sort of pushing me to figure out the how. And it reaches a critical point where I think in around 2010, with some friends, we would sit down and we have this frustration that where I think I ended up coining this term is the every time you Google Rwanda, you will get what we would call the two Gs, the genocide against the Tutsi and the guerrillas. And the reason why you would come across the guerrillas is because the country had reached a point where now um, they were looking at the MICE strategy, so meetings, incentive, conferences, and exhibition, as a way of generating um, uh, quite a substantial amount of money for the economy of the country. And as that sort of having that as a strategy also meant that people would be curious to visit the country and what sort of attraction could we offer to our guests? And the gorillas were always there as a thing where you have this majestic animal that lives in our forest, not too far from the city of Kigali, and it's quite a unique experience. So with that, you have that as a background, but the Kigali we're experiencing in 2010, 2011 is bustling beyond just those two things. We're starting to see a creative scene that's really exciting. We're seeing an art scene that's exciting. I remember going to spoken word events. I remember with some of my colleagues, we would just drive and go to the Akagera National Park, which is in the eastern part of the country. And we're seeing this Rwanda that we're not seeing online. So with that in mind, we said, well, how do we this itch wanting to see the country that we were experiencing online? How do we cater to this frustration? And our solution at the time was to say, well, maybe a communication agency, maybe a creative agency would be the answer to that. And that's how we end up registering Illume in November 2010. And it's really sort of five friends getting together and say, all right, let's whatever we're not seeing, we'll do it ourselves. And I think oftentimes that's how startup ideas are or products or services. Usually, it's usually because of you reach a point of frustration that you're not seeing something that you want. And so yeah, with that in mind, we set up Illume, a communication and creative agency in 2010, and that sets us on a path where um, the interesting part, I think, we were one of the first, if not the only communication agency that was based out of Kigali. At the time, excuse me, we were seeing a lot of marketing companies, we were seeing a lot of advertising companies because um, some of the, I guess, the needs in terms of the organizations that were in Kigali at the time were really focused on getting people to either buy or subscribe to products, that kind of stuff. But so communication in essence and doing a lot of even storytelling before we knew it was storytelling was something that was quite novel and yeah, so that opened up all kinds of opportunities. And obviously at the beginning we almost had to completely sort of redefine or define we were and what we were trying to do. And you kind of have to constantly explain that something as simple as a beautiful photograph can change the way people perceive your brand. A nicely done highlight video can change the way your organization is perceived or can communicate something really interesting about the work that you're trying to do. So you're trying to imagine this in 2011, 2012, and then slowly it kind of picks up. And yeah, been very lucky to be surrounded by great people and an ecosystem that has grown, especially. And yeah, that's how you end up with nearly 15 years of experience and Illume still running. Yeah,
Wow, that's a very long interesting story with many sides to it. And
yeah,
I don't know, like when you were just mentioning like the dates 2010, 2011, 20, I'm just thinking, well, where was I in 20 where was I in 2010, 2011, 2020?
yeah. Or think
But
where was the world, right? So
where was the world too?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But yeah, so
yeah,
it's interesting to see how like the Illume and you being at Illume, it mostly I feel like it's really tied to just your um how do I call it, your interest to kind of change the story that was being told about Rwanda at the time. So sort of some sort of branding or rebranding efforts in terms of storytelling, and seeing where that started now and where that has taken Illume in terms of the kind of work that you do today. I can see the connection, even though it's 15 years later, but I can still see that it's still tied to just telling stories in a new way and telling them authentically. So very interesting to see how it started and how it's turning out. But yeah, just also in line with that now, with your experience as a co-founder of Illume and also now advisory board member, congratulations on that again. Um,
yeah.
what would you say are the key things that people will need to understand if they plan on starting a creative agency just like Illume in Rwanda or in just any other African country? What are the things that have worked well or things that that people will need to understand before they go into such an endeavor?
Yeah, so I think uh, reflecting back to my journey and where, be it Rwanda, be it Africa, where the world was, there's a lot of opportunities that were not there. There's a lot of understanding that were not there. I would say even there's a lot of technology that was not there, right? At the time, for example, when we were posting photos of Rwanda, we were using this platform called Flickr, and Instagram wasn't much of a thing. TikTok didn't exist. Snapchat didn't exist. All these platforms did not exist, right? So the way we were sharing these stories was mainly Facebook. I remember being one of the biggest platform, and then we were very early on um, Twitter, which is now X, and so what you end up with is the sort of the conditions and the environment back then was quite different to what we're dealing with now. But I think the frustration or the challenge or was that the way we experience this continent is never how it's reflected to the rest of the world. And I think that will always remain until we decide to change that. And people have been doing that. So it's not, I think the opportunity, the exciting part is to say, can you shift the narrative? Um, one day at a time, one video at a time, one photo at a time, one campaign at a time, can you shift that narrative? So if you, I think, as a person and is interested in that and sort of affecting that kind of change and being basically part of that change, then there's no doubt that sort of this avenue of exploring, be it a communication, a creative, or storytelling. And I speak to this because that's sort of the world that I come in, communication as well. Um, there's a massive opportunity, and then seeing where the continent is now as a whole, all 54 nations. Obviously, there's standouts. There's the ones that are sort of influencing the kind of music that we listen to, the kind of food that we eat, and now even things like sports, right? Where there's kind of this shift and looking at sports as a sort of economic development tool, right? And the sports doesn't exist alone. I always tell people sports does not exist alone. There's always this sort of entertainment and cultural world that revolves around it. You can see it in football, you can see it in basketball. Um, we all know musicians are always praising these soccer players writing those songs, and basketball, as colorful as it is, right? Like people are really creative with their style and the way they dress, and all these things, right, are around us, and continuously sort of reshape this narrative of what is it to be Rwandan, what is it to be African, and what is it is even, I think, to me the most exciting part as well is what does it even mean to be a diaspora, right? When you have this continent that's doing these amazing things, the kind of pride that you can find in those moments. So, um, to a person wanting to start a business, I said the time has never been right, more than now. It's an exciting time. Can you jump on the wagon? But I think one thing that I would say is, and this is a word that you mentioned at the beginning when you're making the intro, was authentic. Um, don't try to copy what's up there. I think this can be done in an authentic voice, and be true to yourself, be true to your culture, be true to your country and to your continent. Just be you. Don't try to exaggerate things. Don't try to add all these extra things that are really not necessary. And I think if you have an authentic voice, and you're sort of telling this story from your perspective, from where you're standing, it's bound to be authentic. And from that point, it's bound to attract people. So, setting up a business in the creative industry, yes, it's had some challenges, because the reality is some of these platforms, for example, I'm not making a plug, but I have a Substack, and funny enough, you can't receive payments being on the continent unless you set up, for example, some sort of payment from outside, and then how can you access your money? These kind of things, these kind of challenges. And I think TikTok to this day, Africans here on the continent can't really monetize from it. So you have these, yes, technological, let's say, challenges, but still doesn't excuse the fact that you can make an influence, you can impact the way this country, or this continent is talked about. So it's an exciting opportunity. Everything is digital now. Africans are more connected than ever, and the world, the globe, is constantly demanding this kind of content and stories from the continent. Right? There's this thirst, there's this hunger to hear what the continent has to say. So tell your story, be authentic, and start that company. And I would say the last thing is, maybe a reflection to being 15 years deep in this game, is the resilience. Just don't give up at the first sort of speed bump. It is called a speed bump for a reason. So it will slow you down just a little bit, but eventually you'll pick up speed again, and the kind of this energy that is needed to keep going year after year after year. I would say, yeah, don't lose that. So the opportunity is there. It's an exciting time. The technology is there. The access is there in terms of audience. Looking at a global audience, looking at a continental audience that also wants to learn from each other. I think that curiosity is always interesting. And then use your authentic voice, and then don't give up. Right. So if I can take those ingredients, that would be my advice for someone wanting to start um, a business, or an endeavor in the creative industry.
So if I would summarize that in my own voice, I would say, so authenticity in the work you do, and then also resilience, because you're going to come across a lot of road bumps in quote road bumps in quotes. But yeah, I wanted to also just following up on that. So when it comes to those road bumps that you've mentioned, especially on the business or entrepreneurial side of running an agency. So, what are some of these road bumps that you've encountered in your 15 years? Because that's a long time, and I'm sure there's probably been as many road bumps in those
Yeah.
in those years. So, what are
Yeah.
some of these road bumps that you've encountered, especially on the business side of things that you did not expect that you're going to that just popped up in the running of an agency and just in your creative entrepreneurial journey in general,
Yeah.
and how did you overcome, if you have overcome them, because I mean some of these things are still things that you would keep um working on as
Yeah.
throughout your journey, but for those ones you've overcome, what are some of those things, and how have you been able to deal with some of these road bumps?
Yeah, like I said, I think for the beginning of us, for us, we even had to uh, make a case for our own existence, essentially, right? Because I think the market, the potential clients, everyone understood what is marketing, what is advertising. Because at the time, it's as simple. You take a few photos of a bottle of beer and something, and maybe people cheersing. You put that on a billboard, you slap on a slogan, done, right? But now you're competing against all these brands, and let's say now you introduce influencers, right? It's like, oh, okay, that's my friend, or that's someone I love their style, and okay, am I being inclined to try that Fanta because of that person, right? Rather than a billboard, right? So at the beginning for us, just in terms of the technology and what's out there, and even just the understanding of what is communication, what is storytelling, what is even the creative industry. That kind of stuff didn't exist. So challenges in justifying your existence were there. I think I want to be optimistic that in most markets now, people are starting to understand. There's a better understanding in some markets more than others. So in terms of challenges, you're not so much uh, trying to define who you are and what you do and what you offer, but rather now I think there's a side towards the value. Um, People are trying to see, okay, are your services or what you're saying, is it valuable to us? So in terms of bumps, I would say, let's say there's also the practical side of things. I think like any, I think it's if it's treated and understood like any business, right? You're going to have, organizational challenges. You're going to have, I would say, maybe even regulatory challenges, and then just understanding the kind of market that you're in, right? So challenges could be that you may not have the funds to be able to afford, let's say, an accountant or a lawyer, because those two things are do really matter, I think, at the beginning of the journey. So I would say if you can make sure you're set, whether you're getting, I don't know, pro bono sort of services from those two sort of focus, the legal side and the finance side, because as you navigate through this world, the other challenge will be that you the your potential audience, your potential clients are expecting you to behave like a normal business. So they're expecting invoicing, they're expecting to be able to share a contract, and being able to work on that together as partners, and then as you figure that out. So understanding that yes, you want to create, or you're this creative person, and the world of finance and accounting and the legal is as a creative person, it's kind of hard. And so I would say very early on, find allies, find people who can help you with that, because that will help you then navigate the rest of the environment. And then second, it's understanding the kind of laws and regulations that are working with your country and of operation. I think what we've seen here in Rwanda is the sort of the improvement of the laws and understanding, and these kind of things um, that help and facilitate sort of this business environment and being able to operate. So understand what you're dealing with in terms of the rules and regulation within your country. And then, those are things that practically, it doesn't matter what kind of business you're in, you're going to encounter these things. So it's not immune to the creative industry. What I would say is oftentimes it's actually the professionalization of the creative industry that is a challenge, right? Finding the right partners, right? Making sure that in your hiring process you're diligent and you're patient. I would rather take time to hire a good accountant than rush and hire some phony guy, right? So be mindful of those things as you go along this journey. It's really important to have the right team around you, and then yes, understanding that um, as much as you might be excited at this opportunity, If you identify yourself as a creative, find the right partners to help you deal with the other stuff. This means invoices. It means finding someone in operations so you're able to manage the requests that are coming in, and being able to keep up with the calendar, and the emails, and right, and being able to invoice on time, and follow up with payments. Those are very practical things that I think as a creative person, this is different from a communication agency, but as a creative person, you need that kind of support along the way. So, because those are real challenges you're going to come across, and those things do matter in your ability to deliver. So the work might be beautiful, you might understand what the client wanted and deliver on that, but if the rest didn't sort of support you along the way, then chances are you're going to have some major, major, major problems. So finding the right professionals, because those challenges are real, and then being able to deliver. Yeah,
I think when it comes to professionalization, that's definitely one of the biggest challenges
yeah,
that we face, because it's like we start out these things as hobbies, and yeah, it's like that transition from being something you just do in your free time or you do for fun or to share on social
yeah, a
media.
hobby. Yeah,
Exactly. To something
yeah,
that you now have to write an invoice. And I mean, for I think there's this, I won't call it a stereotype, but it's just known that creatives tend to not want to do all those professional, all the invoicing, the writing contracts and all of that. You just tend to find the easiest way to just go straight to the work. But then it usually has its consequences, because most likely the people that you are working with, they know like the business side
those
of it,
gaps.
and they can
Yeah,
find a way to maneuver
take
around that
advantage.
and make the best for themselves, and then you end up not getting the best value out of it, as out of that project
Absolutely,
or collaboration as a creative. So
absolutely.
definitely, um yeah, it's something that I personally still struggle with. Like there's always that temptation sometimes to just, I don't know, maybe after I've also gotten 15 years of experience, it'd be a different situation. But there's that temptation to once in a while feel like, I think I can just work on this thing without a contract. It's someone I know,
Yeah,
I trust them. But yeah,
yeah,
it doesn't always end well. End well. So definitely have to treat it as the business that it is. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, and with these things, with the professional side of things, the business side of things, did you learn all of these things just from experience along the way as you encountered them, or did your education or any other professional experience before that play a part in teaching you how to deal with those things? Do you have any resources that helped you?
Yeah, so I think in our case, we're very lucky. Five founders that have stuck together for this long is probably unheard of. It's sort of, I would say, a unicorn in that sense. But yes, having the right partners does matter, right? So as a step one. Number two, yes, as you're saying, these are things you're either going to learn as you go, and through experiences, or now I would say I think there's a lot more available resources to tap into to be able to educate yourself early. And while for us at the time this stuff didn't exist, we didn't have ChatGPT, we didn't have a lot of the resources that you could go into and just ask some basic questions. Hey, if I'm opening a business, what do I need? So yeah, it starts with the kind of thing where you're all able to work on an invoice, and then the requests become many, and then now you're kind of losing track of what's happening, and then it's like, okay, well, maybe we need a bigger office because there's more traffic, and then you realize, well, if I'm spending Monday, Wednesday, Friday doing invoices or contracts or the legality of the things, is when do I have time to create, right? So then you say, okay, well, maybe for scheduling, for operations, for us to be able to attend meetings, for us to be able um, to figure out some of the early start conversation, we need an operations manager. So that happened, kind of that evolution happened where we said, all right, I think we're really good at creating and coming up with these communication strategy, this creative, the thinking part, but we needed someone to help us with the day-to-day task of booking a room for a meeting, of making sure, hey guys, there's an email that came in yesterday. Have you responded to it? And then can I get started on the invoice, and then you guys can complement, right? So these are very practical things where you start saying, okay, well, this I really need help with, and then by the time your business is running, and now you obviously you're registered business. The assumption here is you're a registered business. Then tax season starts, and then you look around and you realize that you're a bunch of creatives, and in our case, it was a mix of creatives and lawyers and scientists and these marketing gurus that were it was this mishmash of different talents, but none of us had sort of this accounting and finance background. We did have some basics, we did understanding some of the stuff. So at the beginning, it's kind of very easy, but by the time it gets a bit more complex, a few years in, then you realize that maybe you need someone, and then you bring on someone, and then you realize that maybe after a year or two, the business has outgrown this person, and then you maybe hire now an agency, an accounting firm that's able to help you now manage and understand. And in case of Rwanda as well, it was the tax code was always evolving and adapting. So having a company whose dedication is that in understanding what is happening, and being able to say, hey guy, heads up, next 6 months are going to be different because we've switched from this to that, is really key. So um, but I think the realizing and then acting on it is essential for your survival. I think those things. It's one thing to know that it's there and that you need it, but I think you do have to act on it. You do have to say, okay, well, let me tighten the belt. Let me maybe I don't know. Could be that you need to reduce maybe your take home, and for the good, and say, hey, I think we have to play the long game here, and say, let's go for an accounting firm, and you have to do your research, and you have to interview a couple of them, and eventually set with who you think is best suited for your business. So those are very practical things that you'll probably encounter at the beginning, and I would say now with this, maybe a podcast with chat gpt, all this technology that is there, you get to skip all of that and go right into it. So I would say as early as you can, don't wait more than a year to bring in professional help when it comes to that, so you're able to focus on your craft, on your ability to put together a communication strategy, to come up with a marketing plan, and branding, and being able to now do the actual work that you enjoy, and your creative side gets to really have fun doing that, and then you let. But this does not mean, and I think you're alluding it towards the end of your question, is that you have to educate yourself. So I remember in I want to say 2018, yep, the Stanford Graduate School of Business has a program in East Africa and West, and it's called the SEED Transformational Program. So we're able to recognize that, hey, Illume had some traction at the time, and we had grown, and it was now time to get sort of this knowledge to continue to grow. So be it on a company aspect of this, because this was on a Loom Creative Studio as a company joining this program, or even on an individual basis. Don't settle down, always learn, always read, educate yourself, so that you're able to navigate these things as you go along. So your accountant might be good, but you need to be able to sit down with them and almost go line by line and understanding what they're telling you, so that yeah, and we've had many cases, I think, when we see celebrities all over the world where their accountants were able to finesse them. So, yeah, it requires you to educate yourself, you as an individual, you as a company, and then, yes, finding the right partners. And that happens over time. It could be from a terrible experience to now saying, you know what, let me think ahead, and get these things in place before it bites.
I think you've placed a lot of emphasis on the role that other people or the people that you work with play in the success of your work as an agency. And I just wanted to also ask, when it comes to how I put it, selecting the people you work with. So in terms of, it could be your partners, the people you partner with to start, the people you partner with along the way, but then also the people you hire, like that accountants and people that you hire along the way, especially as you scale. Because I mean, I'm sure the number of people you started with 15 years ago is not the same number of people you have now
Mhm.
in at Illume. So what are the key things that you've looked for when getting people to join your team? What are the key things that you're always on the lookout for when you're selecting people that you work with?
Yeah, so in the case of Illume, I think very early on, it's understanding that we all had this same uh, vision, right? It's say how can we change uh, the results when you Google Rwanda, right, or Africa, right? It was this idea, this amazing vision that if you went on Google and you type Rwanda, you get different type of images beyond those two G's that I had mentioned earlier, right? So it is essential to understand that at the beginning, if you're having a conversation with a partner too, and you guys are agreeing on this, then chances are you are on the right track. So that's step one. Step two, I would say, um, do you maybe complement each other, right? And maybe not everyone has the same skill or in the same sort of field as well, right? It's to say, well, you're really good at writing and putting together this communication plan, excuse me, and I'm really good at doing these amazing highlight videos, and then you're really good as a photographer and graphic designer, for example. And then you say, okay, so the three of us combined make a formidable team, right? And I think there was an acknowledgement that the five of us all needed each other to be able to succeed, to get where we wanted to go. So that's on the aspect of finding that right partner. It requires a lot of conversations. I remember Gael, we met in 2008. Then my colleague Gael, we talked about this idea of starting this photo and video company, and then we kind of lost touch a bit, but then reconnected again, I think in 2010. My other colleagues, Anne, John, and Gael now reconnect here in Rwanda for something else completely different. At the time, there was an event, sort of this African event called FESPAD, which was a dance festival, and they're having late night conversations about this again, this frustration, and then how do we answer that question. So it requires. So we're talking almost a 2 or 3 year um, span of continuous thinking, and then this idea of what is Illume in the background of your head until it gets really uncomfortable and say, okay, now let's move forward, let's maybe even quit our jobs and let's jump in the water, right? And having this understanding that you're making this leap of faith together, and right, and you're going for it. So once you've achieved that, like to the part where about now you find the right people, it's as simple as having, sending out, hey, we're looking for an operations manager to join you. If you're creative or not even creative, but if you're passionate about sort of helping operate things and bringing sort of these things together and facilitate, maybe you're the right person. And you interview. We do 5, 6, 7 interviews, and then within that, as a collective, you're bound to find someone. You say, hey, you know what? We can all agree on this person, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go well, right? Like it could be that after a year or so, you realize, okay, maybe there's no real alignment, or this person has different aspirations, right? After a year, they could say, okay, well, I've achieved what I wanted. I want to move on to the next thing. So understanding that, the moment you start bringing in teams in, staff in, also, I think a very practical things is that they will not, you know, uh, die on the hill with you. I think you might be not surprised, or you might be shocked that they're not up late and being able to respond to an email and that kind of stuff, or jump on a call at 5 in the morning because the client is in a time zone, right? So for them, it's just a job, right? It's a 9 to 5, and they're expected to be paid at the end of the month and that kind of thing. So the reality is, you as founders, oftentimes you're the ones who were able to stay up late, who were able to do these kind of sacrifices and really going the extra mile. So understand the difference between being a founder and being a staff. So yeah, these are very practical things. You will interview, you will probably have a turnover high or not so high. Some days you'll be lucky, you'll bring in a person that will stick around for 5 years with you guys, and then sometimes it's as soon as the probation 3 months are done, they're like, this is not for me, right? So these are shocks and things that are bound to happen. So just be aware of it. Don't be surprised that it could happen. Not everyone sees it or has the same vision or aspirations, they're in stages of their lives that where this matters to them. It could be that 2 years down the road they feel like, okay, they've acquired enough skills to move on to the next thing, and that's okay. Yeah, so understanding those dynamics are very, very important, and that will allow you to kind of. But I think as long as maybe the core, the two or three of you, or even you by yourself, you're still sort of maintaining, and this vision and mission that you have in your head is still very clear and relevant, then you'll be fine. Because as long as you don't lose steam, you will always find someone who's able to join your team and help you get there.
I think just to touch on the point of people not being able to probably jump, wake up early in the morning for that emergency meeting because I mean, it just makes sense because ideally, I mean, we probably want it to be that way, but then the founders, the people who started this business, they were the visionaries and they're the ones who have the most passion for this cause that the business is working towards. And so everybody else, there might be people, just as you said, who might come along the way who share almost the same level of passion for this, but
Yeah,
in the end, it's a job before it is anything else for anyone who is being hired, and it just makes sense that the founders, the people who are the visionaries, they just need to understand this as much as you might probably want them to feel that same passion and drive, but it's probably most likely not going to be the case.
yeah,
But to touch on something you also mentioned, you talked about before when you spoke with your colleague Gael, and you talked about like the point where you thought maybe okay, it's time for us to quit our jobs and go and start this thing. So that, I believe that then implies that before you started this, you were to some extent working something more, I don't know, say 9 to 5, or at least you weren't running your own thing. So were there any how do you say, like, the lessons you might have learned, or were there any lessons first of all that you learned from that side of your experience, so working under someone else, working in another company, that have fed into um the work you have done or the work that you do at Illume? Because there's this I don't know if you if like online there's this whole um I say argument of people just always encouraging someone to quit their jobs and go start their own thing, quit your job and go start their own thing. What advice do you have around that whole transition from like a 9 to 5 to starting your own agency or business?
yeah. I think we have unique stories, especially when it comes to Illume founders. I think Gail and myself. Gail was really a scientist, and myself, I was mostly a freelancer, but also working for this magazine in Toronto that was kind of coming up and in the sports and entertainment world. Um, so yeah, and then the rest of my colleagues maybe had a bit more classic 9 to 5 jobs. Apologize for the dog, but the I would say just make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. And with that is I remember the few savings that I had sort of evaporating within the first 6 months, and then you're like, all right, so where's the money gonna come from? And some months it was a challenge where you could have real dips in terms of maybe you finish this job and then there's nothing else on the horizon, um, and you kind of have to go back out there and chase and find. So I would say if you can, maybe save up, maybe give yourself a cushion, maybe find a way. There's many ways one can do this without necessarily jeopardizing, um, let's say, their well-being in a way. or maybe the dependence that you have, or your family that kind of relies on you as the breadwinner. So be cautious of the world, or your rather the environment around you, and make this decision, an informed decision, right? As they always say, make an informed decision. So weigh the pros and cons before you jump, right? Like it's always very exciting to start something yourself, and you have that drive and passion, and nobody understands, but you see it. But at the end of the day, if you know school fees have to be paid, and the water and electricity has to be paid. These are very real things. So be conscious of that decision before you make it. Yeah. So other than that, it's like any business. I think at the beginning nobody knows you, nobody has seen your work, so you're going to struggle to make a name for yourself. But once the wheels are rolling, and if you, especially if you deliver, then you'll be fine. You're going to have some good days, some bad days, some bad months, and depending on whichever sort of industry you're in. And I'm saying this even beyond just the creative world, is it's sometimes it's also seasonal, right? For example, if you're a photographer, and your focus is weddings, right? Okay, sure, people get married every day, but we know there's some high seasons and some low seasons. So be aware of that. And then when it's low season, how are you compensating for that, right? So yeah, I would say, in terms of lessons, uh, I would maybe it's just the drive and passion. This thing that we were talking about earlier, being able to, when you know it's a job and someone else's job, to stress about when you get paid, and right, and sort of at the end of the month, and you're not even interacting with clients directly, right? You're just there to deliver on something very specific. It's very easy to be laid back. Whereas now, when you switch to be the founder, the one who has that passion and drive, it's on you, right? What you earn at the end of the month is on you. There are no shortcuts. There are no alternatives. Comes down to you yourself, and there's no shortcuts about it. You just have to get the work done. So yeah, if you're going to bet on yourself, go in 110%. Don't be at 98. And how do you know this? I guess it will become uncomfortable one day, where you say, you know what, it's been real. Thank you for the job, but I'm going to craft my own sort of journey now, and follow my own path. So yeah, you'll get there. You'll get to a moment where it's no longer, you can no longer sort of afford to be in this skin, and doing these things for someone else. You say, hey, I want to take control of my own narrative, and I want to dictate where I want to go. So when you do that, when you know that, when that voice is 110% sure, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just generally understanding, because in as much as there is always, I feel like there's a lot of emphasis online these days on that, quitting your business and moving to something, the place you work is where you are paid a salary to kill your dreams, all that narrative around
Oh,
around. And I mean, to some extent, it is true, because you can get too comfortable, and then you probably had things you might want to work on, and you just push them aside because of the comfort and security of this. But at the same time, when you do decide, and if you do decide to make a shift to starting your own thing, it's all about just understanding the things that are at stake, and then preparing properly for that transition. Because as
absolutely.
much as you have your passions, you have the things you want to work on your own business, you still have your rent to pay, you still have electricity and water, and depending on where you are in your life, you probably have a lot more responsibilities of people you are responsible for. And so you have to consider all of these things before making that decision. So I definitely, I'm on that. I agree with you on that too. But yeah, so now, still on the business side of things, something that's a little more cliche, but I think that it's a problem that every creative tends to face, which is talking about money when it comes to your work. So either be it as an agency or be it as a solopreneur, there's always that issue of knowing how to present the value that you're providing to your clients and to discuss money. So from your experience, from your 15 years of experience, how have you handled that personally, for projects that you might have worked on as a solopreneur, and then also as an agency in general? How do you talk to clients? How do you present the value that you be providing them, and how do you charge for the services you offer?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think, like you're saying, whether you're a solopreneur or starting a business in the creative world, you're going to be faced with that question. And again, I think waiting or relying on some magic answer to come from the air is not the way to go. So I would advise you have all the tools now. Things are, ChatGPT is free. um, and really just dive in and say, okay, this is me as a photographer. This is what my services are, specifically for weddings. What can I charge, right? And there's research. You have to do market research. You have to understand the kind of environment that you're in, and go according to that. And you have peers, and there's people you're going to ask. Maybe take another photographer out for a coffee and be like, if you don't mind asking, like, how much do you charge? Like, how do I best place myself, right? Vis-a-vis of, and these are, you should have open conversation as much as you can, and consult your peers and consult the industry around them. We used to do things like really send out surveys and ask around, and maybe find out and do research, and you find out and you say, okay, where do I now want to place myself vis-a-vis of the service that I'm providing, right? And say, okay, well, I want to be on the premium end, so if the average is this, I want to go just a little above that. But at the end of the day, if that's the choice you're making, you still have to be able to deliver, right? And this comes back to the professionalism we were talking about. So how do you approach? How do you email? How do you have these conversations? These are things you need to research, you need to read about, you need to ask your peers. There's really that, I think that's one of the biggest lessons. There are no shortcuts in these things. You have to do the work. There's the work of managing a business, of understanding your market, and research, and how can you get yourself through the doors, right? It's having the boldness of saying, you know what, I'm going to email that CEO, or I know a friend of a friend who has the phone number to that CEO. Let me figure out how to give them a cold call and say, hey, my name is so and so. This is what I'm up to. I'd love for us to meet for a coffee, and I tell you what I'm about, and what I do, and maybe one day you might need our services, right? It's these kind of things that you need to do along that journey. There really are no shortcuts. I remember us, doing marketing campaigns, right? So you say, you know what, we're investing $200, we're investing, I don't know, $500 the next, 3 to 6 months, and we're going to do ads, and we're going to push out this list of services, and we're very particular about the market that we're looking for, what age group, what industry, what side of the continent, and these things, and I think you have to pair that with the ability to deliver. I think if there's something I can emphasize, and the quality has to drive you nuts. Like you cannot take shortcuts. You cannot pretend to be some premium content creator, and your product is average. And meanwhile, you're out there sending emails with astronomical prices. That doesn't work, doesn't pass, right? Like you have to be able to deliver, right? If people are looking for you, you need to be able to be present, and be able to deliver. So yeah, there are no shortcuts, and yeah, and do the work, ask around, do your research, and then eventually you'll find your space. You'll find your sort of price range where you want to be. It won't be overnight. It might take you 3 months. It might take you 6 months of trying. You might send out an email with a bill of $1,000, and the client to say you're crazy. And I actually believe at the beginning, these things of being paid in exposure. I think oftentimes we talk about it. I think you do have to have enough experiences to be able to say no, to something like that. And I think at the beginning, when you're trying to build your portfolio, you're trying to show the world who you are and your ability to deliver because word spreads around. Um, you do have to pick and choose the moments where you say, you know what, I'll do this one for exposure. Because once the word gets out there that it was Dami, that it's Philippe, that did those things, then it's like, okay, well, maybe we should consider them for the next thing, right? And then from then on, you'll figure out how to now start asking for a payment. And then now there's also even being creative. I remember we used to do gigs with some of these hotels and say, okay, well, um, maybe you don't have a budget, but let us stay at your hotel for 3 days, and then we'll be able to capture all the content, right? So not only are you enjoying maybe these 4 or 5 star hotel experience for 3 days. You're not paying for the food, you're not paying for the room, you're enjoying the swimming pool, but you're also doing the work, right? Like at the end of the day, I keep emphasizing this: there's no shortcut. You have to do the work and you have to be able to deliver. Because once the client is happy, the next season they'll be able to give you a call, right? And then, or maybe their clients will say, "Hey, who did this content for your hotel? Would love to have them at our hotel," right? Like the word spreads around within that community or right or that sector, right? So these are things that there are no shortcuts. Do the work, do it well. Yes, at the beginning, some of it you can do it for exposure. Just tuck in your ego, you'll be fine. Do the work for exposure, and then build your portfolio as well, right? You can't go to someone and say, hey, I'm premium and I'm charging this price, and then say, send me a portfolio, and then you have nothing to showcase, right? That doesn't add up. So yeah, I think I would summarize it like that.
Definitely, and I understand the how do I put it, reluctance sometimes to quote unquote work for exposure, but just as you mentioned, it's in the end it's just about exchanging value, and that value does not necessarily have to be monetary all the time. You just sit down and weigh what you're offering and what this person or this client is offering you back, and seeing if they at least fairly balance out each other. And if that means, okay, they're not going to pay me, but I'll get to spend 1 week in the hotel to cover some event there or something, and I'll enjoy my time there. Then maybe that is some sort of payment, or they will fly me to this country I've not been to before, even though they're not paying me for this actual gig, but I
Right?
get to experience a new place just because of this thing. And then also, if it's like, especially at the beginning of your career when you don't really have an audience that has eyes on your work, then maybe the people you're working with, their audience can help you amplify your own work, and then that leads to more clients for you in
Opportunity.
future, then opportunities. It's
Yeah.
just about balancing those, seeing the balance between the value you're providing and the value that you'll be receiving from a project. But yeah,
Yeah.
you have to sometimes put your ego aside, especially at the
The
beginning.
the first like couple of years, don't
Hmm.
don't like
Yeah.
don't fight it. If there's an opportunity to, like you're saying, stay at a hotel for a week because you're covering
Hmm.
some event, go for it, man. Like build your portfolio, and then
Exactly. And that portfolio part, very important. You have to have something to
right,
show. You can't tell someone I'm going to work on this logo for you for $1,000, but then you only have two logos on your portfolio and they're not even good. Like, how do you, two
yeah,
logos you did on like from a course or something? Like,
right.
it's not enough to prove
No,
that
no,
your services are worth that amount. So definitely it's something I've also put into practice myself. So after but yeah, also um when it comes to just the work you do, processes at work, client management, all of these things, what are there any particular processes or systems that you set in place that help you to just manage your clients better or do your work better on the business side of things?
yeah. I think, like I mentioned earlier, realizing very early on in our journey that we needed an operations manager was critical to the expansion of Illume as a business. And then, so with that came yeah, so you might bring in an operations person, but you may not necessarily have all the procedures figured figure it out within your own company. So that's very normal, and that's okay. But I think again, it's just not relying on some voice of God to be able to give you those answers, and doing the work and saying, okay, well, typically for us, we get, you know, I don't know, 8 out of 10 requests via email, right? And then one request via phone call, and then maybe now there's WhatsApp, right? So you understanding sort of that ratio in terms of, okay, so now, well, if the emails are coming in, you know, you set a deadline that within, I don't know, 48 hours you've responded, right? And for example, at the beginning, we used to say, okay, well, sure, we're interested in this job, let's do it, da, da, da. Maybe you do your invoice, you do the job, and then we deliver. But I think as sort of time passed on and the clients have become a bit more sophisticated and understanding exactly what they want and expect in terms of an end product, we moved to things like sending a very clear questionnaire list when somebody reached out to us. And this included the questions of what's your budget, what are your timelines, and then even, you know, defining that any request that you get where you're supposed to do a turnaround of like, you're supposed to, let's say it's 2 p.m. right now, and I have to respond to you by end of day and all these things, and understanding like, hey, you've not given us the time to really think about this thoroughly. We don't have all the um, questions answered, and then you say, okay, well, maybe you have to pass on this opportunity. So understanding in terms of processes, how big are you, how do you want to deal with the requests that are coming in, and managing that. And so it's, I think that you learn over time, and then you install some processes, and you make sure that, you know, your ops manager, your team understand that if the requests come in, this is how we deal with it. If it's photo and video, some content creation aspect of it, here's a formula for photography, here's a formula for video, right? Like what kind of, and you sit there as a team and you say, what kind of questions we want to ask, right? What are the things, what are the challenges that we always come across, and what, what can we clarify very early on before we engage with these clients so that it reduces the stress points, right, as you navigate this. So um, understanding all of that, educating yourself, designing these processes, designing your invoices, designing your formulas, and then once you have all the answers, you know that, you know, your invoices need to include A, B, C, D in terms of information and payment modalities. At the beginning, we didn't have those, and then now I think there are those elements that are involved, because you realize that, you know, some clients are able to pay you within the agreed time, and then some are more reluctant, or you have to realize they're also just a business as you, and maybe they're having some financial issues, right, and that kind of stuff, and you may encounter issues where if you didn't have a contract, you'd have been unable to sort of fight for yourself and what you were owed. So understanding all those elements, including them part of your sort of operations aspect of the business, is critical. And then clients, I think only now, maybe, you know, years later, is where you're able to sit down and within a couple of emails, I can, I think we can almost tell if this is an interesting opportunity or not. And that there's no shortcut. Is only time can help you build that sort of understanding and awareness, and or say, you know what, here we have something special. And say, you know what, actually, let's help you. Let's be part of this journey together because we're seeing something really special. Because you'd be surprised, there are actually a lot of clients who did not know what they truly wanted, and the more you probed, and the more you got questions that were maybe different from the initial request, and you find yourself on this side in terms of answering the request. So it was very interesting coming up with all those things. You find that maybe even the enterprise you're dealing with don't fully understand internally, for example, what's their vision and mission and where they're trying to go and what are their needs. So these are things that it's experience. You have to go through it one, two, three, four, five companies over time that you start seeing these patterns and you can recognize that, and you will know how to address it. So yeah, I think very open and clear conversations. I think that's why things like questionnaires are essential, because in cases we would have very clear questions in there saying, hey, what's your budget? What's your range? What are the timelines? These things that are very critical in for you in determining the ability to deliver. So yeah, just be as direct as clear as possible. Clarity matters. Don't try to use some fancy words. Just be like, hey, what's your budget? And then negotiate from there to see what works for you. Yeah.
Very good, very good advice. And it's like one thing I've heard from almost every point you've touched on has always been there's no shortcuts. Like you just have to learn it. You have to learn it. You have to do what you need to do. There's no short. I think I should add that into the title for this for this
Yeah.
episode, because it was you really emphasized that. But definitely it makes sense that you emphasized it, because you really can't just find a way around it. You have to go through it. You have to learn
Yeah.
it. You can learn from other people who have gone through it, but yeah, you have to still put it into practice. It's not There's no way to go around it. And yeah, but so just based on all of these things now, to get some practical advice for younger people who might be just starting out where you were starting out 15 years ago, who are trying to start their own agencies or partnering with their friends and colleagues to start their own creative businesses. If you could go back in time to like 15 years ago to speak to younger Philippe, what advice would you give him? What would you tell him to have in mind as he's moving forward, as he's starting his journey?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the journey, one thing I would emphasize is the passion, this hunger. It's something that, for me personally, I didn't see time go by. I didn't realize it had been this many years, right? By the time you start reflecting, it's been 10 years. You're like, oh, wow, we've been around. But when you do a celebration of 5 years as Illume, it's like, woof, we've survived, right? We didn't die as a business. Because startups, are given a very short time in terms. So 5 years, you're like, whew, we made it. Let's keep going. And then 10 years, you're like, okay, not bad, not bad. And then when you start approaching 15 years, then it's like, okay, cool. We did something right. And I think so. Looking back, I would say the thing um, that helped me wake up every day was just this sort of almost like blind passion for what I was doing, and understanding that this is the reason why you wake up early in the morning and you sleep late at night. If you've eaten a lot, yeah, understanding that like there's a hunger to achieve this bigger goal. So uh, to someone who's starting and at the beginning of stages of this journey, I would say follow that voice. Don't give up on it. You will obviously have good days and bad days, and you will want to quit. But I'd say don't quit. Don't quit. Keep going as long as that. There's another little voice. There's a voice that will say, quit. But there's another one that always says, but nah, I'm not satisfied and I need to keep going. And then because you're in this thing where you're really enjoying so much of the work that you're doing, the creation, the connecting, the network building that you're doing, um, I'm telling you, years go by. So I would say follow that voice. Be really passionate about the work that you do, and then pair that with a sort of really this authentic voice, and then the drive for excellence. Excellence, I think, is not talked about enough in the creative industry, but it's really, truly the differentiator between you and the next business. And the drive for excellence should always be at the top of what you do and what you deliver. So I remember in my own journey is it just I could not settle. I could not settle. I could not be in a room or send something to a client that always felt like it was average. No, it had to be the best of the best. And whether you have to do backflips and to deliver, but it's just deliver excellence. There's really nothing stopping you from doing that, and then you will stand out from the rest of the competition, and then sort of the authenticity and the drive and this passion will allow you to have this resilience over time. So I would say, yeah, just I would do it almost the same way. The only thing I would advise young Philippe would be to, and this is only obviously in retrospect and looking back, vision is always, when you look back, it's a lot easier. Is maybe shorten some of these times where we were seeking professional help. Don't wait for so long. Yes, it's cool. You have the energy and the youth fountain to be able to to do these things on your own. But if you can also shorten it, don't wait how many years to get an operations or an accountant. Just if you can do it right away, if you can do it early in the journey, just do it. I think it will save you a lot of time. But other than that, yeah, it's the same. I would say that the passion and the drive and the finding that authentic voice and the drive for excellence is just I would keep those things. I would keep those things for sure. Yeah.
So young creatives out there who are planning to start something. So Philippe's advice for you is be passionate about what you do, because that is what will really drive you through any obstacles that you might face. Then be resilient, don't give up regardless of whatever comes to you on your journey. Keep going, don't quit, and then be excellent in your work. So it's not just about telling people you do good work, but actually do good work, deliver good work, and because it speaks for you. Because this is also something that personally I know. It's like there have been times when I have done, half, how do I put it, subpar work, maybe because of the pay or I got for that particular project. I'm like, okay, I don't need to put this much effort into this. But it has never turned out well, because it's your reputation, it's your brand. And if you tell people, promise people you are going to deliver on something, and then you deliver the opposite, that's the story that they will carry, and that will go to your potential next client, and who might have been considering to work with you, and then they just hear that, oh, your work is not as good as you say it is. And yeah, that means you have lost a potential client, and it keeps going on like that. So your reputation, very important, and one way you can manage that is to make sure you deliver on the excellence that you promise. So that's Philippe's advice to younger people. But thank
Summarized
you.
very well. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you so much. And I mean, now I'm just going to some fun, less serious questions now. So,
Yeah.
like, what's one dream project that you would like to work on or collaborate on that you haven't done yet?
Ha. Uh, Wondering if I should reveal things or dream project. Uh, well, I think there's one we've started, right? So the girl and I and the rest of my colleagues, this book called This is Rwanda. Uh, and the dream is to be able to do 54 of them. So essentially for each nation on the continent and collaborate with local photographers to be able to capture their country from a helicopter perspective, which is quite unique in that sense. So yeah, why not that as a thing? I think that will always continue to feed into this wanting to change the narrative and the perspective, and especially for ourselves and not waiting for someone else to do it. So I think any projects in that sort of line where there's like collaboration amongst ourselves as a continent to be able to change the way first we see ourselves and then the rest of the world sees us. That's always exciting. Yeah, yeah,
I see. sounds interesting. I would like to see those albums once they are released. Yeah,
Yeah,
that would be a lot. I've already seen the one on Rwanda, and yeah,
yeah.
it's beautiful. But yeah,
Okay.
okay. So now,
Mhm.
can you name two other people in the creative space like yourself that you would like to see be guests on this podcast?
All right. Who would I want to see next? Uh, there's a lady in Kenya, but she's of Ugandan origin. Her name is Sarah Waiswa. She goes by Atla Frohiman on Instagram. Uh, Fantastic eye for details, for stories, uh, and I think it would be something really should have an interesting take on the world, and the way she sees the world continues to blow me away and really fascinate. Um, and then I think locally here, I'd love to have you host Kivumbi King um, as an artist. I think he's a very interesting person. But if I go the music route, oh man, Kivumbi, Sema Soul, in terms of the guys who are doing some big things, they're up there. Bukuru, she's really fantastic, amazing voice. So yeah, I think the music scene in Rwanda has grown so much, um, and that ecosystem around it. That would be an interesting topic to cover and hear that perspective. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for your suggestions. Now I've added them to the list of potential people I'll reach out to. So that's why I always want to hear from the people that I'm speaking to, because they tend to know a lot more other people with interesting opinions, just like the ones you've
Right?
shared. So
Yeah.
I'll reach out to some of these people. But yeah, otherwise, thank you so much for joining me and having this conversation with me today. It was really insightful, and I hope that the people who are listening also find it just as insightful. But so, where can our listeners, where can they connect with you online? Where can they find your work?
Yeah. So two things. I think you said thank you for people listening. I also want to thank you for this work that you're doing. Um, I truly believe that we need to sort of have our own voices and tell our own stories and continue to do that. And more than ever, it's a podcast like this, a conversation like this, I can never get enough of it, and we need more of it. So I keep doing the work that you're doing. It's really important, and I think what it does as well, it kind of leaves this maybe legacy or at least archive of thought of where we were. We can look, 5, 10 years down the line and say, how were people thinking back then? And then you can sort of go back to these conversations to be able to do that. So I think I just want to emphasize that that's really important. And then where you can find me, my Instagram is starp in one word, so STARP starp. That's very easy to find. And then on Twitter is my last name without the consonants, so NYR NYR NYRMHG. Um, in terms of, but I can send it to you. It'll be easier to find.
Oh
Yeah,
yes,
but I would say Instagram. Instagram is the easiest way. So yeah,
I was just going to say no worries about that. That will also be in the in the description of the podcast and everything, and even the links to where people can find you online. So
right,
don't worry,
right,
that will be sorted. But yeah,
yeah,
once
yeah,
again, thank you so much, Felipe. I appreciate you being a guest here. And to everyone listening, to everyone who might be watching, thanks so much for listening to this episode. Whatever podcast, whatever platform you might be listening on, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, please don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with any other creatives that you know might find this insightful in their own creative journey. So yeah, thank you for listening. I hope you found this insightful, and see you on the next episode of the Creative Africa podcast. Bye.